First story, Timothy's Abduction, 2005. I've been hesitant to share this. Not because I think people won't believe me, but because the memories are just so strange, so surreal, that it feels like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. I remember it clearly, though. It's been years since that day, but it feels like it happened yesterday. I was out hunting in the Nevada desert, far from any roads or people. It was supposed to be just another solo trip, a few days in the quiet, desert clearing my mind. The heat was unbearable, and after walking for miles, I decided to take a break under the shadow of a rock formation. That's when it happened. I didn't hear a sound, didn't see anything in the sky, just a sudden shift in the air around me. A feeling, if I can describe it that way, like the world itself had gone still. Then, in the blink of an eye, I was somewhere else entirely. The first thing I remember is that it wasn't the desert anymore. There were no harsh winds or dry earth under my feet. Instead, I was lying on a cold surface, flat and smooth, with a strange dim light coming from above. My body felt heavy, almost like I was pinned down. My head throbbed, but it wasn't a regular headache. It felt deeper, like my mind was being pushed and pulled in ways it shouldn't be. I tried to move, but everything in me was numb, like my body had been replaced with something else. I could barely lift my hand, but I did, and I saw them. The beings. They weren't human, not by a long shot. They stood near me, at least I think they did. Their forms were blurry at first, like they were out of focus, but they slowly sharpened in my vision. Medium height, grayish skin, no hair. And their eyes, deep black, with a kind of emptiness that chilled me. But it wasn't just fear that I felt. There was something else too. Calm, like I should trust them, like they weren't there to harm me. But it didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it, but it was almost like they were inside my head, speaking to me without saying a word. It wasn't voices, not like how you hear your own thoughts. It was more like a feeling, a knowing. They wanted to show me something beyond anything I could have understood. One of them stepped forward, and I swear I saw a flicker of something in their eyes, almost like a gesture. And suddenly, images started flooding into my mind. I saw distant stars, whole galaxies spinning in ways that made my head spin too. Civilizations, more than one, more than anything I could comprehend. I felt as though I was being shown the history of the universe itself, but it wasn't something I could consciously understand. It was like a download into my brain, too fast for me to process it all. I felt overwhelmed, like my mind was cracking under the weight of it, but I couldn't scream, couldn't even move. It was like they had control over everything I was feeling. And that's when I started to panic. I wanted to shout, to ask them why this was happening, but nothing came out. My mouth was frozen shut, and every attempt to move felt like I was trapped in my own body. The images continued, shifting from one to another so quickly I couldn't keep up. There were flashes of what looked like otherworldly cities, with buildings that defied physics, towering spires that seemed to float in the air, and beings walking among them. Beings that didn't look like anything I had ever seen before. They weren't human, not even close, but there was a sense of familiarity in their form. Something deep and primal that made my heart race even though I couldn't fully understand it. The strange beings surrounding me seemed to acknowledge my fear, but not in a comforting way. It was like they knew exactly what I was feeling, yet they didn't care. It wasn't cruelty, it was more like indifference. I felt small, insignificant, like a single grain of sand in an endless desert. I was nothing to them. At some point, I realized that I was no longer alone. There was another being in the room with me now, different from the others, taller, its features sharper and more defined. Its skin shimmered in the dim light, reflecting shades of silver that seemed to move like liquid. It wasn't until this one approached that the air around me seemed to tighten, and the sensation of pressure grew unbearably intense. The cold surface I had been lying on felt like it was pressing into my bones. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. But that didn't happen. Instead, a strange calm washed over me, like the fear that had gripped me was being gently pulled away, replaced by a sense of surrender. It wasn't relief, but it wasn't terror anymore either. The alien reached out. Its hand wasn't a hand, really. It was just a long, smooth appendage, like a tentacle with delicate fingers, and touched my forehead. That's when it all became clear. The sense of calm, of peace, was no longer just a feeling. It was a full, overwhelming presence. They weren't trying to hurt me. They weren't trying to control me. They were simply observing. For what felt like hours, I stayed like that, frozen in place, as the being's touch on my forehead sent strange waves through my body. I couldn't think. I couldn't feel anything beyond the overwhelming presence of it. The images slowed down, but they didn't stop. I began to see more. Some of it was too abstract, too alien for my brain to process, but other parts felt so familiar, like echoes of a past life that I couldn't recall. It was as though they were showing me the future, showing me the history of the universe. I saw civilizations rise and fall, entire worlds destroyed in a blink, and I couldn't understand why they were showing me this. Why me? Why now? There were no answers, just more images, more sensations. The overwhelming feeling of being insignificant returned, and it scared me. But at the same time, it didn't. It was like being shown the truth of the universe, and the truth was something I wasn't meant to understand. There were no words, no explanations, only the feeling of being caught in something much larger than myself. Something that could change everything I thought I knew. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I was back in the desert, lying on the hot ground under the blazing sun. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The transition was jarring, like I'd been snapped out of a dream, but the lingering sensations, the weight in my chest, and the aching in my head told me that it wasn't a dream. I sat up slowly, my body feeling weak and strange, as if I hadn't used it in days. My hands were trembling, and the pain in my joints was almost unbearable. I looked around, trying to orient myself. The vast desert stretched out before me, just as it had when I first laid down. The rock formation was still there, but everything felt different. The air was heavier, like it had changed somehow. The eerie calmness I had felt inside that strange place was gone, replaced with a deep, gnawing discomfort that I couldn't shake off. I stood up shakily, my legs feeling like they might give way beneath me, but it wasn't just the physical weakness that was unsettling. It was the overwhelming sense that something had shifted inside of me, something I couldn't explain. It felt like I had been torn apart and put back together, but not quite the same. I tried to shake it off. It had to be a weird, twisted hallucination, right? Maybe I was just dehydrated, or the heat had gotten to me. I couldn't let myself think that something else was out there, But I knew deep down that wasn't it. The feeling wasn't just in my head, it was in my bones. My heart was racing and my thoughts were jumbled, like I was seeing through a fog. It wasn't long before the dizziness became too much. I collapsed, back onto the ground, panting, my vision spinning. That's when I noticed it, small, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable when I focused on it. A mark. It was on the inside of my wrist, almost like a burn, but it didn't hurt. It was as though someone had branded me with something, an imprint that wasn't there before. I rubbed at it, trying to make sense of it, but it didn't fade. It just stayed there, as if it was a reminder that whatever had happened to me wasn't a dream. It was real. And it was happening to me. I don't remember how long I stayed out there in the desert, lost in a daze. When I finally managed to get back to my truck, I was in a fog, barely able to think straight. The drive back to civilization felt like a blur. My body ached, my head pounded, and I kept seeing flashes of those images in my mind, images I couldn't fully grasp. I tried to tell myself that I had just snapped, that I had gone too long without sleep, but deep down, I knew better. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. When I finally got home, I was so exhausted that I collapsed into bed and passed out immediately. But even in my sleep, it didn't stop. The dreams were worse than anything I could have imagined. Strange, distorted versions of those same images, only more vivid, more detailed. Sometimes I could hear their voices. No, not voices, but thoughts. Their thoughts pushing into my mind, invading my every dream. It felt like they were still there, watching me, probing me, and I couldn't escape it no matter how hard I tried. When I woke up the next morning, I thought it would all be over. I thought maybe it was just some kind of mental breakdown or a hallucination brought on by the desert heat. But the symptoms didn't go away. The aches in my body were still there, worse than before. I felt drained, like every ounce of energy had been sucked out of me. But the worst part was the feeling of being watched. It was constant, like I couldn't escape it, even in my own home. I would glance over my shoulder, expecting to see something, but nothing was ever there. The images, the strange visions, kept coming back, uninvited. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw glimpses of those beings, their cold, emotionless eyes staring at me. I began to wonder if I had been marked in some way, if whatever happened to me out there in the desert had left an imprint on my very soul. That mark on my wrist, the one I still couldn't explain, started to itch, then burn like it was alive. I tried everything to get rid of it. I scrubbed at it with soap, tried to cover it up, but nothing worked. It was like it was part of me now, part of something I didn't understand. A few days later, I tried to put it out of my mind, thinking that maybe I could move on and forget it ever happened. I went back to my regular routine, tried to get back to normal, but the unease never left. I would catch myself staring at the sky, wondering if they would come back, wondering if they were still watching. Every time I drove down an empty road, I couldn't help but look up at the sky, half expecting to see a craft hovering overhead. But nothing ever appeared. No signs, no strange lights. But it wasn't the absence of them that haunted me. It was the knowledge that they could come back at any moment, that they could take me again. That night, I had another dream. This one was different, though. I didn't see the beings, but I felt their presence, felt them closing in, surrounding me, like they were trying to reach into my mind again, trying to pull me back to wherever they had taken me. It was as if they were reminding me that they were still there, still waiting. The worst part, though, was when I started to forget. I'm not talking about the details of the event, like where exactly I was or what they looked like. I never forgot that. But small things that seemed so simple, started slipping through my memory like water through my fingers. I couldn't remember how long I had been out there in the desert. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten back to my truck. I couldn't even recall the exact path I had taken after the abduction. It felt like pieces of me were being erased, like my mind was slowly fading. Every time I tried to focus, to hold on to the memories, they became more and more distant, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. I tried to write things down, tried to keep a journal, but it didn't help. It was like the more I tried to remember, the more it all slipped away. And that was when I realized something. Whatever happened, out there in the desert, whatever I had experienced, it wasn't over. It was still inside me, pulling me in, taking away everything that was mine. I didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't know if I ever would. I started losing track of time. Days blurred together. The world around me felt unreal, as if I was walking through a fog that nobody else could see. I'd forget conversations, forget appointments, forget the simplest things. The worst part, it didn't feel like normal memory loss. It was as if I was being erased piece by piece. Little things would disappear, like I'd open the fridge and forget what I was planning to make for dinner. I'd be sitting on my couch watching TV, and then I'd look up, and hours would have passed without me even realizing it. My thoughts became fragmented, like there were gaps, holes in my mind that couldn't be filled. At first, I thought it was just stress, the trauma of whatever I'd gone through. But it was more than that. It was as if my mind was trying to protect me from something. The worst part was that it wasn't just memories. It was like I was forgetting who I was. I didn't feel like me anymore. The person I used to be, the hunter, the man who had a clear sense of purpose and identity, was slipping away. The mark on my wrist never went away. It didn't fade. It didn't heal. It stayed there, a constant reminder of that day, of whatever I had experienced, and sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it, almost mesmerized by it, as if I was waiting for something to happen. Maybe it was supposed to be some kind of sign, some clue to understanding what had been done to me, but every time I looked at it, it just felt wrong. Like it was supposed to be there, like it was part of me now, but it didn't belong. I started to see things that weren't there, hear things in the silence. Little whispers, barely audible, but they were there. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, hearing those whispers like they were coming from inside my own head. I'd sit up, looking around, but nobody would be there. No aliens, no strange figures, just the quiet, empty room. But I knew deep down that they hadn't really left, that whatever had happened to me, it wasn't over. They were still there, watching, waiting. It was like they had left a part of themselves inside me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still pulling the strings, somewhere, somehow. A year passed and things didn't get better. I couldn't shake the feeling of being different. I tried to move on, tried to forget about it, but the experience lingered in my mind, haunting me in ways I couldn't describe. I stopped hunting. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the desert. Every time I looked out at the wide open spaces, I felt like they were calling me back, like I had unfinished business with them. But I didn't know how to go back. I didn't know if I wanted to. And then one day, it stopped. Just like that. The whispers, the dreams, the strange feelings, they all went silent. I didn't know why or how. It was like I was being left alone again. But there was no relief. I wasn't at peace. I felt like I had just entered a new kind of nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. I don't know why it happened or what it all means. I can't explain it. I still don't know if what happened that day in the desert was real or if I imagined it. But every day, I feel that mark on my wrist. Every day, I know that something is out there waiting for me. I don't know if they'll come back. I don't know if I want them to. But I live with the fear, with the knowledge that whatever I went through, it's not over. It never will be. Second story, Visions of the End, 1999. It was the end of September, and the Nevada desert was as quiet as it ever gets, with just the occasional gust of wind that stirred the dry earth. I had been on the road for hours, heading toward Las Vegas. I'd been driving alone for a few days now, trying to clear my head, escape from the noise of the city, and find some peace. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the barren landscape, and I remember thinking how beautiful it looked. Out here, how strange and empty. I had the radio on low, something soft playing, and the hum of the car was the only sound. But something felt off. At first, it was subtle, just a feeling that I couldn't shake, a growing unease that I couldn't pinpoint. But it wasn't until I saw the lights in the sky that I knew something was wrong. At first, I thought it was just a plane, but the way it moved, it was impossible. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before. It flickered like a star, but pulsed in strange patterns, and then it shot across the sky in a way that made no sense. My heart started pounding as I slowed the car down and pulled over to the side of the road. I kept my eyes on it, unable to look away. It was too fast, too erratic. There was no sound, just the sight of it, darting across the sky, and I remember feeling completely frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't even think. Then, without warning, the light grew brighter, a blinding white, and before I could react, the ground beneath me seemed to disappear. I don't know how it happened, but I was suddenly somewhere else, still in my car, but no longer on the road. I couldn't tell you how or why, but I was being pulled upward. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The car seemed to be levitating, and everything around me turned a sickly greenish hue. I saw it then. The ship. It wasn't what I expected, not like the flying saucers you see in the movies. This thing was huge, a massive disc with an eerie, shimmering surface that seemed to ripple and shift like liquid. It hovered above me, and the next thing I knew, I was being pulled toward it, as though I had no control over my own body. It wasn't painful, but it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. It was like being stuck in a nightmare where no matter how hard you tried to wake up, you couldn't. The next thing I remember is being inside. I don't know how long it had been, but the moment I found myself aboard that ship, everything was colder, harsher. The air was thin, and the walls, if you could even call them that, seemed to pulse, as though the entire place was alive. I could hear something, like a hum, deep in my chest, vibrating through the air. There were no windows, no clear sense of time. I was disoriented, terrified, and alone. And then they appeared. I don't even know how many of them there were, but I know they weren't human. Their skin was dark, almost black, but it shimmered in the dim light as if it was reflective. Their eyes, those eyes, they were what haunted me the most. They were so bright, so piercing. It was like they could see straight into my soul, and I felt like they were reading every thought I had, every fear I had ever buried deep inside. I froze. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by their presence. They didn't speak in words, at least not the way humans do. Their communication was different. It was more like a feeling, a series of emotions and images that flooded my mind all at once. It was overwhelming, almost suffocating. I didn't understand it at first, but over time I started to make sense of it. They weren't hostile, at least not in a way I could comprehend. But they were concerned. They showed me flashes of the earth. Oceans polluted with plastic, skies choked with smoke, forests burning to the ground. They weren't just observing. They were trying to make me understand something. They were trying to make me see the future. A future where Earth was no longer home to humans, or to any living being. They made me feel the pain of the planet. I could see it, feel it. Everything was dying. And it was like the weight of that knowledge was crushing me. They didn't say anything directly about their purpose, but the message was clear. If something didn't change, if the destruction didn't stop, Earth would no longer be fit for any life. The examinations, if that's what you could call them, were quick but deeply invasive. I don't know how to explain it without sounding crazy, but I felt like they were trying to understand me, trying to understand humanity. They didn't use needles or anything like that. Instead, I felt pressure, like invisible hands pushing down on my skin, on my bones, probing into my mind, my body. It wasn't painful, but it was disturbing. The sense of intrusion was overwhelming. They were looking into things I didn't even know I had inside me. I can't explain it, but it was as if they were mapping my mind, my thoughts, my very essence. And then came the questions, not spoken, but felt. They asked me about Earth, about human behaviors, about our disregard for nature, for life. They asked why we allowed it all to happen, why we kept pushing the planet to its breaking point. And there was this one thought that kept creeping into my mind, a terrifying realization. They weren't just showing me the future. They were showing me what would happen if we didn't change. A future where we weren't the ones in control anymore. At some point, I don't know when or how, the visions shifted. It was as if they were trying to show me something more personal, something deeper. I felt a strange mix of dread and urgency as the images continued. And then I saw it. Visions of other worlds, other species of beings, some so different from us it was hard to even grasp. They weren't like the ones who had brought me here, though. These beings, they felt alien in a way I couldn't explain. There was no malice, but they were cold, distant. They had their own worlds, their own way of existing, and they were coming. I could see ships descending, great shadows over Earth. I wasn't sure if it was a warning or a promise, but I knew something was coming, something bigger than any of us. They showed me this, these glimpses of an Earth invaded not by the creatures that had taken me, but by others, creatures with motives I couldn't fathom. And the Earth, our Earth, it was nothing like what it was now. It was dying, a shell of what it once was. The feeling of being watched intensified. They were everywhere, in the shadows, in the corners of my vision, even though I couldn't see them clearly. It was as if they were reading my every thought, probing every secret, every fear I had. I felt small, insignificant, like nothing more than a specimen under a microscope. But then came the part that I can't stop thinking about. The part that haunts me still. They showed me Earth's future in vivid detail. Not just the environmental collapse, but something worse, something beyond our control. I saw cities overrun, people fighting over scraps, violence and chaos, and then a complete silence. The Earth, lifeless. And in the distance, the sky was dark, empty. It felt like a warning, but it also felt like a prophecy. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just showing me the end. They were showing me the beginning of something else, something we weren't ready for. When I woke up, if you can call it waking up, I was in my car again on the side of the road, just as I had been before. The desert stretched out before me, silent and empty. I looked around, trying to make sense of it all, but it didn't feel real. I was disoriented, like I had just emerged from a dream that was too real, too vivid. I could still feel their eyes on me, still hear the hum in the back of my mind. The fear that had gripped me when I was aboard that ship hadn't gone away. It lingered deep in my chest, and I knew that something had changed. Something had shifted inside me. I looked up at the sky, expecting to see something, anything, but it was clear. The stars were just stars. The night was just a night. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had seen, everything they had shown me, was true. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not at first. I was scared they'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. But the visions, they didn't stop. I'd close my eyes and I'd see them again, those creatures, those beings watching me from the darkness. And I'd see the future, the world crumbling under the weight of our mistakes. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like they were trying to tell me something. Something I had to do. I became obsessed with it, with warning people, with trying to make sense of what I had experienced. I started researching, reading everything I could about UFO sightings, alien encounters, anything that might explain what I had gone through. And the more I dug, the more I realized just how little I really understood. But one thing became clear. The destruction of the planet wasn't just something to fear. It was something that was already happening, something that we were already a part of. I couldn't escape that knowledge. I couldn't help it. I started speaking out, talking to anyone who would listen. At first, it was just small things, little conversations with strangers, trying to tell them about the environment, about the state of the world. But the more I talked, the more desperate I became. It was like I was trying to force people to see what I had seen, to feel what I had felt. The weight of that knowledge was too much to carry alone. I began to see things differently. The way people threw their trash on the ground, the way they consumed without thinking, the apathy that seemed to run through everything. It was like the world was sleepwalking, and I was the only one awake. The things I had seen in that ship, they kept haunting me. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd be back there in that cold, dim space, hearing their voices in my mind, pushing me to act, to make people understand the urgency of the situation. But no matter how hard I tried, no one seemed to listen. People brushed it off, laughed it off. And the more they did, the more frustrated I became, until the fear of being ignored turned into anger. Maybe that was what they wanted from me, to make me feel small, powerless. There were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the taste of fear sharp on my tongue. Sometimes I could almost hear their voices in the distance, like whispers in the dark, telling me that I was running out of time, that the earth was running out of time. But even then I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all inevitable, that no matter how hard I tried to warn people, nothing was going to change. And the thought that kept eating at me, that I couldn't escape, was the fact that they knew. They knew what was coming. They had shown it to me. The destruction wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. And as much as I tried to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't seen what I had, that sense of helplessness, of doom, never left me. It hung over me like a dark cloud, pressing down on me until I felt suffocated by it. I still don't understand what happened that night. I don't understand why they picked me, why they showed me those things, or why I can't shake the feeling that something is coming. I wish I could forget it, wish I could go back to before, when the world felt normal, when I could sleep without worrying that I was running out of time, but I can't. And no matter how much I try to convince myself it was just a dream, just some kind of hallucination, I can't shake the memory of those creatures, their dark skin, their glowing eyes, and the way they looked at me, like they knew something I didn't, like they were trying to warn me, trying to make me understand. The worst part is that I know I'm not the only one. There are others out there, others who have seen the same things, felt the same fear. We just don't talk about it. And maybe that's the real horror of it all. Knowing that we're all connected by this terrifying knowledge, and yet we do nothing. We just wait. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I still see them sometimes in the back of my mind. When I'm alone, or when I'm drifting off to sleep, I'll catch a glimpse of those eyes, those dark, knowing eyes, and I'll feel that same cold fear grip me. But now, it's not just fear of what happened. It's fear of what's coming. I can't explain it, but I feel it deep inside me. Something is coming, something we won't be able to stop. I know I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, and as much as I try to ignore it, I know that Earth's future is already sealed. We're already on the path to destruction, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. I can't unsee what I saw, and I can't forget what they showed me. I wish I could, but I can't. It's been years now, and I still can't forget. I still can't stop thinking about that night, about what they showed me, about the warning they left behind. I can still feel that weight, the feeling of being watched, the fear that has never truly left me. I don't talk about it much anymore, but I can't stop wondering if it's too late, if we've already passed the point of no return. I've tried to move on, tried to forget, but I can't. Every time I see a news report about another natural disaster, another environmental collapse, it's like I'm right back there on that ship, hearing those voices in my head. And I know, deep down, that they were right. We didn't listen, we didn't change. And now there's nothing left to do but wait for the end. Third story, Lost in the Shadows of the Sky, 2001. It was a normal day for me. At least that's what I thought at first. I was out in the Nevada desert, testing a new camera I had just bought. I'd been into photography for years, mostly nature stuff. Mountains, the open sky, the desert. I loved how the vast emptiness of the desert made everything feel so still yet alive in its own way. I had been driving for a couple of hours, just listening to the hum of the engine, when I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or maybe a plane in the distance. But this thing, this object in the sky, wasn't moving like anything I had seen before. It was a disc shape, shimmering, almost as if it was hovering but not making any noise. I stopped the car, my heart racing. I grabbed my camera and started taking pictures, but every time I looked through the lens, the thing seemed closer. It wasn't right. It was like it was getting closer with each snap of the shutter. My hands were shaking and my breath quickened. Then, before I could even register what was happening, the world around me went black. When I came to, I was no longer in the desert. I don't know how long I had been unconscious, but everything felt wrong. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I could feel a cold, metallic surface beneath me, and I was lying flat on something, smooth and hard. There was no sound, no wind, no animals. It was so quiet that it almost felt suffocating. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. Panic set in immediately. I could feel something on my face, something cold and wet. I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My heart was pounding so loudly that I thought it might burst. And then I heard them. The figures. They weren't human. At least, not fully. They were humanoid, but their eyes, those damn eyes, were all wrong. Large, black and reflective, like something you'd see in the eyes of a wild animal. Their skin had this strange texture, almost like scales, but not quite. It was as if they were a mix between human and some kind of creature, something not of this world. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but I couldn't. They moved closer, and I felt a sharp pain in my side, like a needle or a sharp instrument pushing into my skin. I wanted to scream again, but the pain was too much. And then, everything went dark once more. The next thing I remember is waking up in a cold, sterile room. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before. The walls were a smooth, metallic gray. There were no windows, just lights in the ceiling that flickered on and off in a strange pattern. I could feel the weight of the air around me, thick and oppressive. I tried to move, but my body was still weak, like it had been drained of all energy. I wasn't alone. The creatures were back, standing just out of reach. Their eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I felt like I was being studied, examined like some kind of specimen. One of them stepped forward, and I felt an intense pressure on my chest, almost like it was trying to force something into me. I couldn't move, couldn't fight back. And then I saw it. Through the small window in the wall, I saw flashes of images of Earth, but not like I'd ever seen before. Cities burning, the sky filled with storms, people running in panic. It was as if I was seeing the future, a future where humanity had destroyed itself. The creatures weren't just here to observe. They were showing me something urgent, something important, but I couldn't understand it. Why me? Why was I the one they chose? The flashes of destruction continued, and I could feel the urgency, a sense of dread crawling up my spine. I knew then that whatever they were trying to show me, it was already too late. Something had already been set in motion. I don't know how long I was there, but time seemed irrelevant. Everything blurred together, the pain, the fear, the strange images flashing before my eyes. I was in and out of consciousness, barely able to tell what was real and what wasn't. But one thing was clear, the creatures weren't just showing me destruction. They were showing me something else too, something they were trying to tell me. There was a message. I could feel it deep inside me, but it was scrambled, like static on a broken radio. I couldn't quite understand their words, but somehow I knew they were trying to warn me. There was something coming, something unstoppable, and humanity wasn't prepared for it. The urgency was overwhelming, like an alarm going off in my brain, but I couldn't act on it. I wanted to scream, to plead with them, to explain, but I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped. The creatures stepped back and the lights in the room flickered once more. Everything went dark. When I came to again, I was lying back in the desert. I couldn't believe it. My hands were still gripping the camera, but the sand around me was undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no signs of the terrifying creatures or the cold metallic room. It was like nothing had happened. I checked the time on my watch. It had been hours since I had first seen that ship in the sky, but I couldn't account for the time lost. I staggered to my feet, my body trembling from the strain of what I'd just experienced. I didn't know if I had dreamed it or if it was real, but the sense of urgency didn't go away. My head was pounding and my heart was racing. The images of the future, of the destruction, haunted me. I wanted to shake it off, to convince myself it was all some weird hallucination, but deep down I knew it wasn't. There was something coming, something I wasn't supposed to know about, but now I did, and I had no idea how to warn anyone. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the creatures, the way they looked at me, the way they communicated without speaking. It was like they were inside my mind, showing me flashes of things I wasn't ready to see. I tried to tell myself it was just a crazy experience, maybe a hallucination from dehydration or heat stroke, but the more I tried to rationalize it, the more certain I became that it was real. I contacted a few ufologists, people who had been studying UFO sightings for years. They were fascinated, but they didn't have any answers for me. They asked questions, sure, but nothing that made me feel like they were truly getting it. They seemed more interested in my experience than in helping me understand what had happened. It was like I was just another case to them, another strange occurrence to add to their files. But I wasn't just another case. I had been chosen for something, and the weight of that knowledge was heavy on my mind. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I had a responsibility now. Something was coming, and I needed to warn the world, even though I didn't know how. The weeks following that day were the worst of my life. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that I wasn't alone, even when I was in the middle of a crowded street. The images of Earth's destruction kept playing in my mind like a broken record, and the weight of those creatures' presence lingered. It wasn't just in my dreams anymore, it was in my waking moments too. The paranoia, the anxiety, it was consuming me. I started losing sleep. I couldn't eat properly. My thoughts were scattered, and I couldn't focus on anything other than that damn feeling of urgency. I tried to go back to the desert, to that same spot, to see if I could find anything that might explain what had happened, but there was nothing there. The place was still as quiet and empty as ever. Not a trace of anything unusual. The camera I had used to take pictures was still with me, but the photos I took that day, they were all gone. The memory card was empty, like it had been wiped clean. No images of the ship, no images of the creatures, just a blank slate. It was as if someone had erased it all from existence. I began reaching out to other people who had reported similar encounters. I found a handful of stories, strange as they were, that mirrored my experience. There were others who had seen ships, felt the strange pull to something greater, and who had witnessed images of a future Earth consumed by chaos. But every single one of them ended the same way. Unanswered questions. They were just as lost as I was. No one had any concrete proof. No one could explain what had happened to us. The government had their own theories, of course. Everything, from military experiments to psychological breakdowns. But none of them made any sense. I had tried to convince myself that I was just going crazy. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I saw that day in the desert wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that the clock was ticking, that something was going to happen, and that no one was prepared for it. As time passed, I tried to move on. I tried to return to my normal life, to forget about what had happened. But it wasn't that easy. The sense of dread, the urgency, it never left me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that something was coming, that those beings were out there, waiting for something. I found myself looking up at the sky every night, hoping to see something, anything that would give me a sense of closure. But it never came. And then, one night, I had the strangest experience. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I saw a light outside my window. At first I thought it was a plane, but it didn't move like any plane I had ever seen. It hovered there, suspended in the air, and for a moment I could swear I heard a voice, distant and faint, calling my name. It wasn't in any language I knew, but I could understand it, like the creatures had somehow communicated with me all over again. My heart raced as I jumped out of bed, rushing to the window, but when I looked, the light was gone. Just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving only the silence of the night. I don't know if it was real or if it was another hallucination, but I felt that same sense of urgency again, the same feeling I had the day I was abducted. Something was coming, and I didn't know how much time we had left. In the following weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, the way the light hovered outside my window. I couldn't explain it. It was like it was a message, a reminder that I hadn't imagined everything, that they were still out there, watching. But I couldn't make sense of it. Why did they show me those images? What did they want me to do with that knowledge? I tried contacting the ufologists again, but they were growing tired of my constant calls. They were skeptical of my claims, and every time I brought up the sense of urgency, the warnings, they just seemed more distant, almost annoyed. I wasn't sure if I could trust anyone anymore. Who could I tell? Who would even believe me? I started to withdraw from everyone, isolating myself, and my mind grew darker by the day. The paranoia only intensified. I began looking for patterns, signs in the world around me, searching for any indication that the things I saw in the desert were true, that those future images of destruction were coming for us. And then, one day, it hit me. Everything I had seen, everything I had been shown, it was all connected. The creatures weren't just trying to warn me, they were trying to send a message to all of humanity, and I was the messenger. They had chosen me, and now I had to figure out how to share what I had learned. But I was trapped. I didn't know where to start. The pressure weighed on me. My once calm and logical mind had been replaced by an anxious, chaotic mess of thoughts. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every day felt like I was being dragged towards something, but I had no idea what. The world was moving on, unaware of the disaster that loomed ahead, and it made me feel powerless. It was like I was screaming into the void. I tried to write everything down, all the details of what I had seen, the creatures, the the experiments, the images of the future. Maybe, if I could make sense of it all on paper, it would help me understand the bigger picture. But when I looked at the words, it all seemed so ridiculous, I felt like a fool for even trying. Maybe I was just losing my mind. Maybe I had been out there in the desert too long, the heat and isolation getting to me. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling became. The message was there, and I had to get it out before it was too late. The sense of urgency wasn't going away, and neither were the creatures. I could feel them, somewhere out there in the dark, still watching, still waiting. But for what? What were they waiting for? As I continued to spiral into this paranoid state, I tried to take action. I went to a few local media outlets, hoping to get someone to listen to my story. I thought that if I could just get the right person to hear me, maybe they would help me make sense of it all. But, unsurprisingly, the responses were predictable. They looked at me like I was crazy, dismissed my claims as delusion, and advised me to seek therapy. No one wanted to hear it. No one cared. It was as if the world was oblivious to the threat I had witnessed. No matter how many people I reached out to, it felt like a door had been slammed in my face each time. I kept coming back to the same questions. What was the point of all this? Why had I been chosen? What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't live with this knowledge and not act on it. But no matter how much I tried, it felt like I was spinning my wheels, trapped in my own head, chasing after something that wasn't there. I began to feel like I was fighting a losing battle, like the creatures had been right all along. It was already too late. The damage had been done, and there was no way to stop it. It was around this time that I began noticing small things that shouldn't have been happening. At night, I'd wake up to the feeling of eyes on me, and sometimes I would catch glimpses of shadows moving outside my window. Not the shadows of anything human, just something else. Something long and elongated, like a figure that didn't quite fit the shape of the world around it. I started seeing these shadows at all hours of the day, not just at night. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the paranoia was getting to me more than I realized. But it wasn't just the shadows. It was the way people treated me. I hadn't told anyone in my life about the abduction, my family, friends. They didn't need to know. But people around me started acting strange, like they knew something. The barista at my local coffee shop started asking me weird questions about the lights in the sky and how I was feeling lately. My neighbor, who I'd barely ever spoken to, casually mentioned how he had seen some strange activity out near the desert, something he couldn't explain. At first, I thought they were just talking about the usual UFO sightings, but now I wasn't so sure. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like everyone around me had already figured out what had happened. And that terrified me. It wasn't long after that I started seeing strange things in the sky again. I'd been ignoring it for weeks, chalking it up to my stress or my mind playing tricks on me, but they were there. This time they weren't just distant lights. No, these were close. Too close. They hovered in the sky above my house, just out of sight, waiting. I could feel the pressure building, like they were drawing closer, like they were waiting for me to do something, anything. And I finally snapped. I couldn't keep running from this feeling anymore. The sense of urgency had been building in me for months now, a slow burn that had reached a point where I couldn't ignore it. I had to go back to the desert, to the place where it all started. Maybe this was the only way to make sense of it. I grabbed my keys, slammed the door behind me, and got in my car. It felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. Didn't know what I was hoping for, but I needed to face whatever it was that had been haunting me. And as I drove through the desert, I felt like I was heading straight into the unknown. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and lonely, but it felt like I was being drawn towards something I had no choice but to confront. When I arrived at the spot, the same spot where I'd seen the ship that day, I felt it. That same oppressive feeling. The air felt heavy, and the desert was strangely silent. Not a sound in the air, no wind, nothing. I got out of the car feeling the hot desert air hit my skin. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. I stood there for a while, trying to get a sense of the place, but there was nothing. Just the emptiness. I was starting to wonder if I had lost my mind after all. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The ship. Not in the sky this time, but right there, in front of me. It was as if it had materialized from thin air. And standing next to it were the figures, the creatures. But this time they weren't looking at me with curiosity or cold detachment. They were looking at me with urgency, like they were waiting for something. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know what they expected from me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone anymore. They were here, and they were trying to tell me something that I couldn't ignore, something that still haunts me, something I'll never forget. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The ship, the creatures, all of it. And I was left standing in the desert alone, with no explanation and no way to tell anyone what had really happened.